October 1962. For 13 days, the world held its breath as two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, stood on the brink of nuclear war. This was the Cuban Missile Crisis, the most intense moment of the entire Cold War. It was a high-stakes drama of secret communications, tense negotiations, and near-catastrophic miscalculations between the White House and the Kremlin. How did we get so close to the end of the world? It all starts a year earlier, in 1961, with a failed Bay of Pigs invasion. This attempt by the Kennedy administration to overthrow Fidel Castro's regime in Cuba was a humiliating disaster for the United States. In its wake, a nervous Fidel Castro sought a powerful protector. He found one in Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev. The two leaders forged a secret agreement to deter any future American aggression. Khrushchev would place Soviet nuclear missiles on Cuban soil, just 90 miles from the coast of Florida. Initially, the Soviets were cautious. They began shipping conventional weapons and surface-to-air anti-aircraft missiles to Cuba. President John F. Kennedy, while concerned, didn't raise a major alarm over these defensive weapons. However, he drew a firm line in the sand, publicly warning the Soviet Union that if they ever placed offensive, long-range missiles in Cuba, the gravest issues would arise. He had no idea that Khrushchev was about to cross that line. On the morning of October 14, 1962, everything changed. An American U-2 spy plane, flying high over the Cuban landscape, captured a series of startling photographs. When analysts developed the film, the images were undeniable. They showed construction sites for medium-range and intermediate-range ballistic nuclear missiles. The bases were being built, and fast. Khrushchev, who had personally assured the Kennedy administration he had no intention of sending offensive weapons to Cuba, had been lying. The ultimate threat was now sitting on America's doorstep. Faced with this terrifying new reality, President Kennedy immediately assembled a top-secret team of his most trusted advisors. This group, officially known as the Executive Committee of the National Security Council, or EXCOM for short, was tasked with navigating the crisis. Their meetings were tense, filled with urgent debate. Some of the more hawkish members, including military leaders, strongly advocated for an immediate military response airstrikes to destroy the missile sites, followed by a full-scale invasion of Cuba. They argued that anything less would be seen as a sign of weakness. However, Kennedy was deeply aware of the potential consequences. A bombing campaign could kill Soviet personnel on the island, potentially triggering an automatic and possibly nuclear retaliation from Moscow. He was looking for a way to de-escalate, not to ignite a global conflict. After days of intense deliberation, he rejected the military option and chose a middle course. On October 22nd, he ordered a naval quarantine of Cuba. The word choice was deliberate. A blockade is technically an act of war under international law, and Kennedy wanted to avoid that implication. The quarantine would stop any ships carrying offensive weapons from reaching the island. That same evening, Kennedy addressed the American people and the world in a televised speech. His words were chilling and direct, leaving no room for misunderstanding. He revealed the existence of the missiles and announced the quarantine. He then delivered a stark warning to the Soviets. It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full, retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union. The line had been drawn. The world now watched and waited to see if Khrushchev would cross it. 2 days later, on October 24th, the standoff intensified. Khrushchev sent a furious message to Kennedy, calling the American quarantine an act of aggression and a violation of international law. He declared that Soviet ships, already en route to Cuba, would be ordered to ignore the quarantine and proceed. The world was now teetering on the edge. As Soviet ships steamed towards the American naval line, the U.S. military was placed on DEFCON 2, the highest level of alert short of all-out war. It was the only time in U.S. history this has ever happened. Then, a glimmer of hope. Some of the approaching Soviet ships stopped dead in the water, just short of the quarantine line. Others turned back. A few were stopped and searched by the U.S. Navy, but were found to be carrying no offensive weapons. It seemed Khrushchev was blinking. However, reconnaissance flights over Cuba delivered more bad news. The missile sites were still under construction and were nearing operational readiness. The clock was ticking, and a peaceful solution was nowhere in sight. On the evening of Friday, October 26th, a breakthrough seemed possible. A long, emotional, and somewhat rambling message arrived from Khrushchev. In it, he offered a deal. The Soviet Union would remove the missiles from Cuba if the United States publicly promised never to invade the island. The mood in the White House lifted. A resolution seemed within reach, but the relief was short-lived. The next morning, a second, much more formal and demanding message arrived from the Kremlin. This time, Khrushchev had added a new condition. The deal would now also require the United States to remove its Jupiter missiles from Turkey, which bordered the Soviet Union. This complicated matters immensely. Publicly trading away missiles that were protecting a NATO ally would look like a major concession and could fracture the alliance, to make a terrifying day even worse. News broke that an American U-2 spy plane had been shot down over Cuba by a Soviet surface-to-air missile, killing the pilot, Major Rudolf Anderson. The military brass was now demanding immediate retaliation. The pressure on Kennedy to launch an attack was immense. As Saturday, October 27th, known as Black Saturday, drew to a close, the world was closer to nuclear war than it had ever been. Kennedy's advisors prepared for an invasion of Cuba, likely to begin within days. Yet, in the final hours, a path to peace was cleverly forged. Kennedy and his team decided on a risky but brilliant diplomatic maneuver. They chose to completely ignore Khrushchev's second, more demanding message and respond only to the first one. Kennedy sent a public letter accepting the terms of the original offer. Missiles out of Cuba for a non-invasion pledge. But there was a secret back-channel component. The final, crucial piece of the puzzle. That night, the president's brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy, met secretly with the Soviet ambassador, Anatoly Dobrynin. RFK relayed a crucial message. While there could be no public quid pro quo, the president had already been planning to remove the obsolete Jupiter missiles from Turkey anyway, and he would do so within 6 months. This part of the deal had to remain an absolute secret. If the Soviets leaked it, the deal was off. The gamble paid off. The next morning, on October 28th, Moscow radio broadcast a public statement from Khrushchev. He announced that the missile sites would be dismantled and the weapons would be returned to the Soviet Union. The crisis was over. Across the globe, people breathed a collective sigh of relief. The world had stared into the abyss, and thanks in large part to the cautious leadership and willingness to compromise from both Kennedy and Khrushchev, it had stepped back. In the aftermath, both superpowers recognized the need for better communication. In 1963, a direct telephone hotline was established between Washington and Moscow to allow for instant contact during a crisis. This was followed by landmark treaties like the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, and, later, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which aimed to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons. The Cuban Missile Crisis served as a terrifying lesson, a stark reminder of how close we came to Armageddon, and it fundamentally changed the course of the Cold War. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this dive into history, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content just like this. We'll see you in the next video.